Hello and welcome to the GD Politics podcast. I'm Galen Druk, and we've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to cover who is actually watching late night television, Kamala Harris's new book, which just came out, whether politicians are using AI to do their jobs, whether efforts to reduce partisan animus actually work, and the government's move to cancel a survey measuring how many Americans are going hungry. Now, I say that we're going to cover it, but I actually mean me. When I launched this podcast, I said that I wanted to hear directly from you, the listeners, and speak directly to you as well. And I imagined that might include podcasts where I open up the mic and do exactly that, talk to you, just me to you. I did it a couple times early on, but it's been a minute, and so I want to do it again. And here's how I'm thinking about it. I'll tentatively call this the GD Notebook. I'll open up my notes, books, articles, and the like that I've been reading, and share them along with some thoughts and answer some of your questions. Often, when I read a compelling article or study or poll, I'll reach out to the author or talk about it with guests on this podcast. But I read a lot of stuff, and we often don't get to all of it, and I constantly have loads of tabs open on my computer with plenty of interesting stuff that we didn't get to. So hopefully we can make good use of some of those tabs here. Today, we're mostly going to go through my notebook, but as a reminder, you can always send in questions for us to discuss on this show. You can reach me through the paid subscriber chat at gdpolitics.com. You can also send me an email at galen@gdpolitics.com. All right, let's start off with a news story from earlier this week. Jimmy Kimmel returned to his show on ABC News. And the thing that in particular stuck out to me here was a poll from the AP looking at who actually watches late night television. So when ABC and affiliate stations made the decision to preempt Jimmy Kimmel's show, there was conversation about, this was the result of a threat from FCC Chair Brendan Carr. Also some commentary about how this could be a business decision by ABC News and those affiliate stations because of business pending before the FCC, or just Jimmy Kimmel not having particularly good ratings. And I think in some ways it's hard to disentangle the two. But if we're going to talk about business decisions, I think it's fair to also look at who the audience is that is being served. And if you read this AP poll, you see that, first of all, a lot of Americans are not watching late night television. And actually, before I even get to the poll, just to put this into context, during the second quarter of 2025, Jimmy Kimmel averaged 1.8 million viewers during his show. That's down significantly over the past decade. But even when things were looking quite a bit better in 2015, he had about 2.5 million total viewers. So there's not a ton of people tuning into this. But if we look at the people who are tuning in, so the AP asked, overall, of all U.S. adults, have you watched all or most of a late night talk show within the past month? And overall, only a quarter of Americans said they had. When you look at the partisan breakdown, it's pretty striking. So a third of Democrats said they had watched all or most of a late night talk show within the past month, and just 18% of Republicans. Now, a lot of this stuff gets consumed as clips, not people actually watching the full show. So the AP also asked that question. Have you watched a clip from a late night talk or variety show within the past month? Again, the divide between Democrats and Republicans here is pretty striking. 45% of Democrats, nearly half of Democrats, said they had watched clips from a late night talk show over the past month, and just 25% of Republicans. So this is a tricky moment for, lots of participants in American media. But when it comes to folks like ABC or CBS or NBC who are making decisions about these late night shows, their audience skews significantly to the left. And so in this situation, there may be some pressure because of FCC business or whatever, or direct pressure from the chair of the FCC that's in line with the Trump administration's priorities. But those aren't the priorities of the audience necessarily. And I think we can look at maybe the Washington Post as an example of what happens when sort of leadership's priorities, partisan priorities, may not align with the audience's priorities. Obviously, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. My friend of the podcast, Nate Silver, mentioned this in a piece that he wrote last week, that At the Washington Post peak during the Trump's first term, they had about 50% of the Google traffic that the New York Times had. And the New York Times is huge, so that's pretty good. Today, it's somewhere in the range of just 10% of the Google traffic that the New York Times has. And so over that period of time, the Washington Post has made changes that are in line with Jeff Bezos's priorities, but not necessarily the priorities of a generally left-leaning audience. I don't think there's so much more to talk about here, but just notable that just as there was suggestion that ABC News was making a business decision in taking Kimmel off the air, this also may be a business decision, putting Jimmy Kimmel back on the air. So I want to move on to our next topic. As a fledgling politics podcast, I think we are probably not going to get Kamala Harris to do an interview with me in conjunction with her new book, 107 Days. But I wanted to read the book nonetheless, and I did so within the past day. I think it came out on maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. Anyway, I read it in less than 24 hours. I actually listened to it, and she voices the whole thing. So that was an interesting experience. And I was taking notes in my notes app on my phone as I was listening to it. I took a lot of notes, and at this point, the 2024 election has been analyzed to death by me and on this podcast and its predecessor, but also in plenty of other books. And so I don't want to belabor these points too much, but I thought that it was interesting. And so I'll mention some of my notes as I was going through the book. First of all, throughout listening to the book, I was trying to figure out what the point of the book was. Is this an attempt to sort of memorialize accomplishments and get Kamala Harris's version of history down in a book? Is it preparing Harris to run for a future presidential campaign? And I think at conclusion of the book, it is still not clear to me. And I think whether or not she runs in 2028 will depend more on things outside of her control than in her control. So I don't think in reading this book, you can get a clear sense or have 100% certainty either way of whether she is running or not running. Another top level takeaway I was thinking about while I was listening to the book is how much of this is an explanation of why Harris lost versus a just sort of narrative TikTok of what was happening behind the scenes on the campaign, because it could make a compelling story.